Hello everyone. Well, question and answer time for Saturday here in Les Sables d'Olonne, and hopefully everything will go smoothly. We had a hiccup with the tracker live this morning, but we had to relay it, which worked okay. Before I get into it, thanks for all the compliments again. We're getting lots of emails about the GGR and how everyone's enjoying it and feel really involved and so on. And we get another common theme too. They like the low-tech aspect of the coverage. So low-tech and a little bit amateurish, call it what you like, I don't know. We just call it real. And we, little team of people that trying to explain how we feel about it. So, it seems to be quite a few people enjoying that. So we'll carry on and hopefully bring you some more, lives on different subjects and so on as we get close. And certainly I get a lot of questions asking about technical aspects on all the details of all the boats and all this sort of stuff. That'll happen. It'll happen in the book, and there's the question here later on. But certainly when those who make it to the finish line, when they get here, we'll be doing some very interesting discussions with them and looking closely at their boats, because they're the ones that have got around. So something to look forward to. Still a long way to go, a couple of months yet maybe for the first boat. And hard to believe really right now that they've, Jean-Luc is around Cape Horn. That's 2/3 the way home. And for us that have been sort of putting this race together, it's like, wow, we are really thinking about the end of the event, which is incredible. And already 2022 is shaping up large in the background. We're not concentrating on it, we're not focusing on it, but nonetheless we're managing it because there's a lot of interest there. So just as an overview, Jean-Luc was the big news on getting around, a classic way to get around. He would have really enjoyed that. I was very happy for him that it was daylight and the weather allowed him to come in close. He was about a mile offshore when he went around. Some of you may have seen the photo, that epic photo from the lighthouse keeper, the Chilean Navy lighthouse keeper there, of Jean-Luc going, just a little white speck right beside the lighthouse. They live for a year on the island there on Cape Horn. Usually the Navy officers and their wives and family and stuff living there. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jean-Luc actually called him up on the radio, said g'day, let him know he was coming, or possibly the lighthouse keeper's following the GGR. I'm not sure. If he is, g'day, drop us a line, send us a message. And he had been there on a visit in 2014 with his wife and some friends, obviously cruising there, and got up to the lighthouse and met them. So all up now is 14 times around Cape Horn. Not all of them are circumnavigations, obviously. This is the only full. This is Jean-Luc's 6th full circumnavigation if he completes the journey. He had a couple of false starts previously. On one occasion, going around with Adrian, his 80-footer, the wrong way around the world. He lost his mast on one of those and had to sail back from Australia all the way back the normal way. So that was 2 trips that weren't a circumnavigation. And then he's had some other occasions, a similar situation with damage of the boat, had to come back. I meant to say last week, this is one of Jean-Luc's boats, a model called the Big Red Cigar. It was his Vendée Globe boat and also a BOC boat. He did the BOC in it. And we talked about Alex Thompson on Boss hitting the bricks in the Rum Road race. Just saying how it can happen to anyone. Doesn't matter whether you're the most experienced guru or someone that's just started. And this is the boat that Jean-Luc went up on the beach in Sydney in the middle of the BOC challenge, where he went to sleep literally in the cockpit, put his head on a winch, and next minute he's out of it, and it's rocks all along the coast, and he planted it on a sandy beach, so he's very lucky. Anyway, so Jean-Luc's around, absolutely shot off when he got into calm water. The sea just dies off completely when you turn the corner. It's quite amazing. And he still had a good solid beam wind, and he was doing the best we saw on a 1 hour average was 8.4 knots. So that was a pretty good way to start. And he looks like he's going to get at least 2 or 3 days of good stuff. He's going through the Stretcho de la Mer. He may already started that. It's a tidal current situation in that gap if you're looking at the tracker. So if the tide goes one way, it'll rocket through, especially now because it's a full moon and there's big tides. The currents going through there will be 5 knots, okay, something like that. It'll be really strong. And if he picks it right, you'll possibly see on the tracker all of a sudden he's making a huge speed. Or if he gets it wrong, he'll slow right down. So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, then he's got the whole tactical thing of being back in the Atlantic, exactly where to go. He will be governed by not getting the wind on the bow. We've discussed this a lot. He doesn't want to slam the boat. And then we've just got to wait and see what happens. It's a long way home, but I know he'll be working pretty hard. It's certainly not over for Jean-Luc in the race, with the damaged rigging. He's a very clever sailor. He knows how to manage and monitor the loads on the boat. So it's still an adventure with an unknown outcome, but I'm feeling quite excited. This is going to turn into something really interesting. The reason I say that is Mark Slats. Mark's on the hunt. If you've read you want to have a read of his latest post. He did a voice recording and it's been transcribed by their team. It's now on the GGR website. It describes the sailing he's in now. He's in Southern Ocean weather, running with a small head sail only or 3 reefs in the main, waves breaking right over the boat. It's on the beam sort of thing and a little bit aft. Cold, wet. I won't say miserable because Mark is an incredibly focused guy. He knows he's aiming at Cape Horn. He's been waiting for this. This is like, I won't call it a home run, but it sort of is. It's a real goal to get around Cape Horn. And so he's focused on that. And then as soon as he gets around, he's just got one thing to do, and that's try and catch Jean-Luc. Further back in the fleet, Uku and Susie and Istvan, that's our middle fleet now. Uku's in a bit of a hole. He's quite comfortable, although he's not talking. I still think he's low on food. I try to encourage him to say, come on, because he's not eating a lot in Hobart. And there's a few of us think he hasn't got a lot of food on board. He says he's done an inventory and he's got enough for another 100 days to get him home. But something tells me he would like to eat more. But anyway, the boat is good. His wind vane's good. He's happy. And they're not getting fast times going to the east like Mark and Jean-Luc had. They're getting some reasonably light weather, and that's brought about because the high pressure systems have moved south, further south than you would normally expect if there's any such thing as normal in weather. Light winds there. Susie's still going, but I think you're going to see more of what's happened in the last week. Susie will catch up a little bit to Uku, then Uku will pull away a little bit from Susie. So it's a hard thing to do, but if you forget about the weather and you go boat for boat, something's telling me that Susie's really hungry now. She can see third place there. And so she's possibly got a bit more of an incentive than Uku. So there's going to be fun stuff there. That's going to play out for the next 2.5 months, all the way back to the finish line, because there's a big difference between third and fourth, even though we're only going to have 6 sailors in the GGR very soon, because of Mark and Igor, but I'll get onto that. So Istvan is still lucking out a bit. He has these problems with his steering systems. So effectively, he's got a wheel steering system. It's solid linked to the rudder shaft, and there is a set of bearings that support the wheel. Now, those bearings are chewing themselves out. He's disassembled the whole lot, and he said, yep, they're completely screwed already, and he's got nearly half a world to sail yet. So, can a wheel steering operate without bearings? Not very well. And the significance of it is that he needs that wheel, which connects directly to the rudder shaft, to attach his wind vane to. Now, Istvan's sort of talking about problems with his wind vane, but I think what he's saying is that there's the wind vane on the back of the boat that operates and pulls ropes, and then those ropes go to a wheel drum that sits on the ship's wheel. And I think he's talking about there's problems to get the steering energy from the wind vane into the ship's rudder somehow. Because the other option you've got, instead of using the wheel, you can put the emergency tiller onto the ship's rudder post. So you put the emergency tiller on and that steers the boat instead of the ship's wheel. And you'd normally do that if the steering system failed. And what's happened is he's got an aluminium fitting there going onto a steel shaft, and it should have been steel on steel, and they wouldn't wear out because there's a lot of load on that, but the aluminium part is wearing out, which means his tiller has got about 20 degrees of play in it, and that'll get worse to the point it'll probably strip, and then he won't have an emergency tiller. If that plays out, it means that you can't steer the boat with the main rudder. And the only option he might have then is to use the emergency rudder. All the entrants have had to show that they can steer the boat and have a complete emergency rudder system off the back of the boat. It's not the sort of thing that you would steer halfway around the world. It's just to get you back to port. So I'm really hoping that Istvan can keep things happening and stay in the event. And I think he's obviously, I know he's looking at all options, but I think he's also worried. So we'll just have to see how that plays out. Then we get down to poor old Tapio. It's weather again. How do you define the weather? But he's already had quite a few days of easterly headwinds, okay, and it's going to be like that for another week or more, and it's unbelievable. So he's really stuck in a hole and cannot make any progress on the course. He's decided to dip south, which is a good move, and he might be able to work his way around a bit and still make some progress, but it's just a horror show for him. He'll be pulling his hair out by the roots, just contemplating, just a forecast. You see in his tweets, he says, "Oh, crikey, I've got another week of this. That's another 7 days without effectively going anywhere in the race." That's as frustrating as it gets. And you might remember what Susie went through when she was just below Cape Town, when she got hooked up into those northeasterlies and easterlies when she couldn't make progress. It drove her nuts, and it's taken months to get over that. Anyway, poor old Tapio, not a good look, and he's still got the barnacle issue and so on. So moving then back to Mark Sinclair, we had the word this morning from him that he has now decided he does need to stop. So he checked over the side for barnacles, and the hull, the canoe body, it's the round bits, seemed pretty clean. But he said all along the leading edge of the keel, underneath the keel, all around the rudder and the rudder aperture and all those things are completely covered with barnacles. So he's got a slight barnacle problem, which is not keeping him moving efficiently, and he also has very little water now. He's just not getting any water. I'm not sure exactly how much he's got left, but he said that's it, game over. He's planning now to make a stop, and he will decide in the next 24 hours whether it's going to be in Adelaide or in Hobart. The incentive for Adelaide is that's his hometown. It's the Royal South Australian Yacht Squadron. His sponsors are there, all that sort of stuff. So if he does decide to go to Adelaide, it'll still be a 2 or 3 day stopover by the time they slip the boat, paint it all, reprovision, get things happening, get it back in the water and go. And going up to Adelaide is a longer route. It'll take him an extra day or probably an extra 3 or 4 days sailing time, because you've got a couple of days up and a couple of days back to get to the equivalent. So it'll either be that or Hobart, and personally I think he'll probably go to Adelaide. So we'll wait and see. Igor, he's planning to go to Fremantle in Perth because he needs riggers, he needs to slip the boat, he needs sail makers and so on. There's a faint possibility he may go to Albany. Albany's certainly a lot closer. We'll talk to his team about that as well and offer any information we can, but he's still a couple of weeks away from that stopover. And the same with Mark. I reckon 10 days or so, maybe a bit longer before he gets up there. It's a slow track if you saw the weather on the live this morning. So if we've thought about this, and when you become, so they'll both be Chichester class once they make their landing. At that point, they're not in the rankings for the GGR. They're effectively out of the race component, but they're still involved with the event and the adventure. And so we've made a determination that because they've moved into the Chichester class within Australia, and we can get their films and all those things that we would normally get from the film drop in Hobart, if Mark decides to go to Adelaide, he doesn't have to come through Hobart again. And the same with Igor. Igor going into Fremantle, he won't need to go into Hobart. It's a bit pointless, really. So they'll do all that as quick as they can and get on the road again. So that's really a quick update. We'll get straight into the questions so we don't make too much time. The first one's from Thomas Strandenes. Will Mark catch Jean-Luc Vandenheede? Classic question. It's on the mind of a lot of people. He has to average about 20% faster all the way back to Les Sables d'Olonne, and if he does, they will arrive neck and neck. And the reality suggests that it's not going to work out like that in terms of how will he slowly catch up with Jean-Luc. He has the potential to sail faster in different conditions. If Jean-Luc's got it on forward of the beam, Mark can sail faster than that for sure. But where Mark has an advantage over Jean-Luc is just your tactical planning. If Jean-Luc finds himself in a bad position where he's got a lot of headwinds and he decides to go out to starboard for a long way, right? Mark can come along and he can say, I could sail to windward through this area for the next couple of days and then go in this direction. And then what happens is you get a massive tactical advantage. In other words, your course becomes 500 miles shorter or something. So that can make a huge difference. It's got absolutely nothing to do with boat speed. So this is where the game plan could be. It's like a lottery. Mark doesn't even have to sail faster. it just means that if Mark can sail differently, he can sail closer to the wind than Jean-Luc can, and makes Jean-Luc do a different tactic, that's where the game plan can go to pieces really quickly. So can Mark catch Jean-Luc? Yes. Will he catch Jean-Luc? Who knows? It's a race, it's an adventure, everything's up for grabs. So I've got no answer on that, but it's going to be very interesting in the next few months, especially if, when Mark gets safely around Cape Horn, and if Jean-Luc can safely keep his mast up, all the way back to Les Sables d'Olonne. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens. And then, of course, can Uku catch Mark? And can Susie catch Uku? And can Istvan catch Uku or Mark or Jean-Luc? Who knows? It's that sort of event. Okay, Philip... Philip wanted to know about, he was fascinated by the discussion that Robin and I had when we did Two Old Blokes Talking last Tuesday on video, or Wednesday or whatever, that we went through a few subjects about would we run with warps, would we run layer hull, would we do whatever. And when it came to drogues, would we use a drogue? And Robin's answer was no, never. And my answer was the same. And he's fascinated because he's read that the Jordan series drogue is the ants pants for everything, da-da-da-da. Well, and he wants me to explain, what my attitude is. And I think I've gone through this a lot. The bottom line is the Jordan series drogue is a very good drogue. There's no question about that. It's the same as any other drogue. But the issue is, are there situations when you wouldn't use a drogue? Absolutely. And what I'm finding is that everyone seems to think that as long as you've got a Jordan series drogue, you can forget about your knowledge and your experience and using a lot of common sense. And all you need to do is, when the storm gets really bad, stick your Jordan series drogue out. That is just all wrong. It's totally wrong. There are big issues involved, and it's a complicated subject, and you'll all need to make your own decisions. But the reason I don't like drogues is that I could list a whole series of people that have actually been injured by putting drogue. One guy got a rope wrapped around his bloody foot and nearly lost his leg. Other people have had their arms go. The loads involved, the stuff are really, really quite hectic. And even though the Jordan series drogue is it's a crossover between a warp and a drogue, it's still got big loads and they're a pain in the butt, So anyway, setting a warps for me is the simple thing to do. And some people will use like 14mm rope and just go for that, like sheet rope or spinnaker sheets or things like that. They all create drag. But to me, towing a warp is a good solid diameter bit of nylon, like your anchor warp, that's sort of a bit sinking and it's got surface area. It's not just a 12mm sheet, 100 metres of that. It's all about drag. But the beauty of a drogue is a warp is that you can pull it in bits and you can put it on a winch and you can winch it through. It's just, I don't know, it's just one of those things. But just do a lot of discovery on it and see how you go. But there's a bit of a common theme starting to flow through. At least we're starting the discussion. And I'm not saying I'm right. These are just my opinion, and Robin was the same. Drogues can be a real problem to set and recover, and they can be a little bit violent sometimes. So, but make your own decisions. Tricky one, that one. Herman Campora. How are the communications going with the entrants? How does it work? What are they doing? Okay, the reality is that they're using single sideband HF radios. So you can Google it and you'll see what that is. Just Google ICOM HF radio or single sideband radio. It's a long range radio, has various frequencies, 2 megs, 4 megs, 6 megs, 12, 20, goes right up into the 20s. The bigger the frequency, the further it'll go, okay? And you can use a radio like this to go halfway around the world. If you're skipping through the night, you can nearly go 2/3 the way around the world, but then it's probably reversed the other way. So then there are government radio stations that can give national weather forecasts for particular areas around the world. So those government stations do that to all shipping. All countries do it. It's always there. It's a backup to all the satellite gear, and it's maintained under the SOLAS and GMDSS or Global Maritime Distress and Safety System network around the world that all the governments sign on to. The other thing they can do is they can use another private marine sked. There's different groups have like a private radio station, and sailors in the Pacific get on that and they all talk between themselves on their single sideband, and they get weather and they can report in positions and so on. The next way is using a ham radio network, and if they're licensed the sailor, he's got a licensed ham radio. He can actually talk and receive by long-range HF communications on different frequencies for ham, and they're just like other operators that have passed a test to get a license. And they can relay anything. So some of the entrants, like Mark Slats, the ham radio operator turns his tape recorder on. Mark keeps talking into that. He records it. He sends the data file recording to his team. They can transcribe it and put it on Facebook. Mark Sinclair has been giving me a lot of audio emails. So he'll talk to a station in Australia. They'll record that, and then that guy will send me the audio file as an email, and I just open it up, and there's Mark Sinclair talking on the radio. So they can do any of this sort of stuff. And then they can, Lionel here is still talking to Jean-Luc occasionally through another ham radio operator. And so Lionel and Jean-Luc are still talking to each other, via that link of long-range radio. So they can pass on weather information. The only thing they can't do is give them routing. So no one's allowed to tell any skipper where to go, all right? They can give them any amount of information, including their own position. If they look on the GGR tracker, get the latitude and longitude, they can pass that on, remembering that we could turn that off at any time. And generally, the entrants are still using the majority of the time their celestial navigation for positions. So that's a quick one on how that works. It's, and we encouraged all entrants to make them realise the importance of HF radio. It's a very big safety feature if the satellite phones go down. Some paid more attention to that than others, and so those that have lost their radios and they're not working, they haven't prepared as well as the other ones that did do that. So it's not that some are disadvantaged by not having a radio. That's the nature of the race. If you lose your radio, and another guy's got it. It's not that he's disadvantaged. It's just that he's lost out because he hasn't prepared as well, or whatever. It's all about being at the finish. Laura Jackson, why no water makers on board? And what's the options if they run out of rain? Well, there's no desalinators on board because they basically weren't commercially viable back in 1968. So none of the original entrants had it. So none have got water makers. If they get no rain, what are they going to do? They're going to run out of water. Simple as that. Some have managed that better than others again. Some left here with 500 litres of water. Left France at the start. Some left with 200 litres of water. So everyone's got a different idea. Some have used it in jerry cans, and if they wanted to, they can use it as water ballast for better sailing, move their jerry cans around. There's no restrictions on water. But if they run out, they go thirsty, or they've got to make arrangements, and that's what's happening. On the safety sense, it's compulsory to have a manual handheld desalinator in their grab bag. It's called a Survivor 06. It's a manual reverse osmosis unit. You put one end in salt water, start pumping, you get fresh water out the other end. But it takes you over an hour to make 200 millilitres of water. So you can't use it for washing your clothes. You can't use it day by day. Even the units, the pumps themselves, are not meant to be used for constant use. They're just if you're in a life raft running out of water and you need to survive. And one of those units will keep about 10 people alive if they had to. And the same unit that Tony Bullimore used, and I used to sell them for 20 odd years to the military, so I know them well. Okay, so Will Bailey, what type of curry powder did Jean-Luc put in his final coat of anti-fouling? Because as you know, Jean-Luc had 3 coats of ablative anti-fouling on the boat, so 1, 2, 3, and then he had a 4th coat, which was what we'd call a hot mix, which had some extra additives in it. There's any number of things that could have been in it. I have no idea what that was, and there will probably be a lot of interest in that towards the end of the race. We'll ask Jean-Luc and say, hey, what was your hot mix? So I don't know what curry powder it was, but it's certainly a subject which will be treated with great endeavour for 2022 because barnacles have become an issue. So Kimber Devine, the 2022 boats, what's happening? Any changes to the boats in the race? Basically, the biggest change is that there will be the current range of boats, which we call the Suhaili class, and then there'll be a new class called the Joshua class, and that's a series of, or they're replicas of Bernard Matessia's Joshua, a 39-foot steel boat, very famous. You've seen it here at the start, the original boat. And that's to cater for a different group of sailors, some that don't want to get involved with refitting a boat. They can buy a brand new boat if they want to. It's also a one design class, so the boats are basically identical in terms of even their sails. They're like class sails and so on. And so that's kind of cool. And then the event itself, there are some changes. We'll be restricting the type of weather reports that they can get in 22. There is a new mark of the course, which is an island called Trinidad in the South Atlantic. They'll have to leave that to port when they go round, the same as Joshua's course in the 68 race. It's a celebration of Joshua, the next 22 edition. This one is all about Suhaili and Robert Knox-Johnson winning and being the first. In 2022, it's all about celebrating the amazing sort of guy, Bernard Matessia, and Joshua, his efforts there. It's still all about the GGR, but that'll be a bit of a focus as well. So there's lots of little things within the rules for 22, but no real other big changes. It'll be this formula works. It doesn't please everyone. We've got a lot of people with other types of boats, 40 footers that want to come in, 32 footers, different designs, lightweight, fin, keel, all this stuff, but we're not going to change that. This it took a long time to develop this concept, and it seems to be working. We've got an event which is quite an adventure, and I'm in fact, more and more people are starting to realise it's probably one of the toughest races in the world. So it stays pretty much the same. Okay, and there's another one going on here. Stephen McEwen, what's the deal with the Joshua class boats? Because he's really hooked. He's passionate about it, maybe. We've got quite a few people looking at the Joshua class boats. They're a replica of the original Joshua. There are no boats that have ever been built that are the same as the original Joshua. Now, some people out there will talk about the meta versions of the boat and this, that, and the other. They were not the same. They were, when Joshua became quite popular and other people wanted them, they slightly modified the design. So all of those other 70 odd boats that were built, none of them were exactly the same as the original Joshua. And the Joshua that we're using for the GGR is a replica, and it's very similar. Hull shape's very similar. It's a multi-chine boat rather than round bilge. Built incredibly strong. You've got no idea how strong this boat is. Having had 23 seasons in Antarctica, I wanted it to be ice strengthened as well, so it's effectively good for the ice. It's a squeeze-out design. Makes a great adventure boat. You could take it anywhere around the world for a couple to live on board and bring friends on for a month at a time or something like that. Use a charter boat, whatever. It's built to, effectively it'll be built to the equivalent of class, watertight bulkheads, bulletproof, and it's a boat that'll be fantastic for the GGR. The first one was my boat. I've delayed it. I shut it down when we started this race because we didn't get a sponsor, and so I've had to focus all my efforts on making sure this one's running right. We've got about 4 people waiting to do something with the Joshua for 22. They're all keen to see the first boat. Now, I won't be finishing my boat until probably the earliest, the end of next year. We've got to finish this one first, then get back into it and go from there. We're building it with Asboat in Turkey, and stand by, there'll be more of that. But, someone may pip me and decide to jump in and buy one before then, and so that they might get the first one. But anyway, we'll see. Okay. We're down to Alistair Nairn. What's the Pacific no-go zone? There are 2 no-go zones in the race. The first one is in the Indian Ocean. You've seen that. It's the big orange box, and it's designed to keep the boats up higher, away from the worst of the weather. The same in the Pacific zone. Okay, it's to keep them up high, keep them out of the bad weather. Also to keep them within range of any rescue assets that might be required if a boat gets into trouble. And we coordinate that with the rescue coordination centres around the world. They agree to this principle and strongly advise it anyway, such that if we didn't have that, the rescue coordination centres would not be happy at all. And I agree with the principle of risk minimisation, so that's where it comes from. And stops them going too far south for ice, because even though it's sort of summer, ice goes a long way north, so we don't want anyone to go in and be whacking on the ice. So that's the idea of it. Okay. Jen's Crow Gel list. Do we have a list of the boats that are reefing their mainsails from the mast versus reefing their boats from the cockpit? And honestly, no, we don't. I've never actually gone through it. There's a lot of pictures of the boats all over the website and on our Flickr page and all that sort of stuff. You could flick through the pictures yourself, anyone that wants to look at the spec on any boat, and you can determine very quickly whether the halyards are all going back to the cockpit. Personally, I would always have my mainsail reefing, hoisting, everything back in the cockpit. I keep all of my head sails and spinnaker gear at the mast because you need to be up on the foredeck anyway. But I always bring the mainsail gear back to the cockpit. It saves you a lot of energy, and you can easily slap in a quick reef if you have to. So at the moment we don't have a list, but you can check it all out. Okay. Valerie Adu, rubbish situation and dropping in Hobart. Well, all the boats have sort of gone through Hobart, but no, we don't take any rubbish off the boats in the film drops because that requires full clearance and quarantine and biosecurity. You can't just chuck your rubbish to another boat, so take it ashore. All of the boats were not cleared into Hobart. They were travelling through as a yacht in transit, so we couldn't put anything on the boats at all, but we had special approval to take the films off. We put them in a bag. We then have to take them to customs, and they're acting for biosecurity. We show them what we've got, and they let us keep them then. So there's very strong, strict quarantine requirements. All the rubbish is being held on board. All the entrants had to complete a waste management plan before the start of the race, detailing approximately how much rubbish they have, like plastic, tins, glass, all that stuff, and approximate weights, and how they're storing their rubbish. And we have a look at that, and if there was a problem, we would have said something. And at the end of the race, they'll hand over their rubbish, and we'll check all that and go from there. So it's quite a responsible rubbish management process for the Golden Globe. Mark Dyson, what plans for the book of the GGR? Because there's 2 books for the GGR, but I'm doing a book which is a story book, and he wants to know basically whether it's going to include this technical statistics and detail. And the short answer is yes, it will, but it may not go to the level that a lot of the sailors want. The reason it'll have a big appendix and technical detail is because that's the sort of thing I love doing, and I'm sort of writing the book. And in previous books like Antarctica and so on, I have huge technical appendix at the back because that used to fascinate me. Right from when Robin wrote his book and Matessia and so on, they all have a big technical section, and it's fascinating for sailors to go through. And there's no doubt the GGR is being followed by a lot of average, ordinary sailors, and they're gleaning a lot of information and getting inspired to new ideas and think about other issues from the GGR. And part of my kick with the GGR is to inspire people to get out and do things. So it will have a comprehensive appendix. Whether it goes to the detail everyone's looking at, I'm not sure, but watch this space. And the same question was with Jesse's documentary. Jesse is directing the Golden Globe documentary. It'll be 2 one-hour docos covering the whole race. Is there a theme? Yeah, there is. There's a very distinct theme. It's quite amazing. It's called the Golden Globe Race. So it's all about the Golden Globe. And it'll be a separate film, a 1 hour documentary just using film, which will be like an art house doco, and that'll do the film festivals as well. And that'll have another fascinating theme as well called the GGR. That's all I can say at this stage. It's a comprehensive one. It'll be quite interesting. I mean, there's some good stuff coming out of that. There's amazing interviews as well. So I think the GGR family will enjoy watching the doco. Hopefully we can get some funding for it. At the moment we have $0 funding for the GGR doco. Jesse and I are doing it ourselves. And we're hoping to walk that around in the next few months. But yeah, there's some classic stuff coming out, and the storyline, as you know, is quite special. Okay. Andrew Q, has Mark Slatz's no furling gear paid off in the Southern Ocean? Well, this is the first thing is I've got to say Mark seems happy enough. There's a few occasions he said he thinks he might have been better off with a furling gear on some parts of the Southern Ocean. But, the last time we spoke on the phone, he was still into it, doing all the usual things. The only thing I'd say is Mark lost a bit of a benchmark when we lost Gregor and Tommy. There's no question in my mind that Gregor and Tommy were wearing down Mark. They were closing in over the last 2 weeks of that whole session, getting closer and closer and closer, and they were really in striking distance of Mark. Who knows what would have happened? That's like trying to suggest what would have happened with Bernard Matessia and Robin Knox-Johnson. No one knows. There's so many variables, and look at what happens. Tommy and Gregor didn't make it for whatever reason, but Mark is still there. So I think generally Mark's happy, and he's still there, and it's all about being there at the finish. So he's got less weight aloft, certainly. I would have normally said he had no advantage and probably a disadvantage in the Southern Ocean, but put him back into the Atlantic and he'll be there soon, he's got a real advantage because he can get better sail shape, he can go to windward better. Will that give him a chance to catch on Luke? Watch this space, So I think Mark's game plan is playing out quite well. Okay, Stefan Eddy, will Igor go to Albany or Perth? At the moment it's Albany. He's saying this on the basis that Albany is closer than going to Perth or Fremantle and saves a bit of time, could save in 3 or 4 days. So it's up to them, I'm not sure. So follow that. Dave Moran, what's the rules on slipping the boat and cleaning the bottom in Perth and Adelaide and so on, because there was a ban in Hobart? Well, once again, GGR has nothing to do with managing barnacles on boats in the GGR. We just have the race rules, collision regs, and then it's up to them. You know the story with first boats through Hobart. We didn't know, we were told after Susie, and so we don't stop the entrants from doing it. We just tell them, hey, if you do that, the government's going to nail you. You can't do it. So what happens in Fremantle with Igor and any other yacht, any other international yacht coming to Australia, if they're a cruising yacht from the Pacific or from Asia or something like that, they have exactly the same processes. They check the bottom, and in fact, you're supposed to slip the bottom and clean it before you leave your last port heading to Australia. That's the sort of recommendation. When you get there, if they see barnacles on the hull, whatever, you've got to slip your boat. You can't do it in the water, and you've got to take all the barnacles off, and you've got to hand the barnacles to quarantine in a bag. That's how it works, and that's what will happen with Mark in Adelaide. Customs quarantine by security will all be told. They'll go enter him into the country. They'll look at the barnacles and say, right, you've got to slip it over there, and you've got to take the barnacles off and give them to them so they can see they're not thrown back in the water. And it's the same in Fremantle. So that's a pretty set process that GGR has nothing to do with. It's handled by the national authority. Greg Warren, do entrants have backup sextants? I believe most of them do. I certainly would if I was going. I've never asked them the question. We don't ask them anything about what they've got for their navigation instruments, but I would think all of the skippers would have a backup sextant. And that could be a plastic EBCO sextant or something like that. They used to have 3 different models of EBCO sextants, the plastic ones, and now they might have 1 or 2, but they're really good. I've used them before. I used them on a few different occasions. So the backup might be a plastic one, but the real ones would be metal, no doubt. Mike Phillips, chicks, how many? Oh, okay. Okay, Mike Phillips, he said, this is a controversial question. How many entrants do I think are going to finish the race? That's easy to tell you. I know exactly how many are going to finish because when we lose Mark and Igor from the entrant list into Chichester, that only leaves us 6 currently sailing in the Golden Globe race, probably the toughest race in the world. So there'll be all 6 of them will get through, no problems at all. So that'd be amazing if we get 6 finishes in the GGR. That means we lost 2/3, which is a lot better odds than the initial race when there were 9 starters and only 1 finisher. We had, we get 6. We had 18 starters potentially, and we'll get 6, so we've lost 2/3. And it's a subject in itself. And when you look at how and why each of the entrants are now not sailing, those that have pulled out or not still sailing, it makes a very interesting story, huge learning curve on a lot of things. I think everyone in the 2022 edition are taking all this on board, and they'll be treating some aspects a lot more seriously. I used to talk to the entrants about a lot of things, and I know some of it, for some of them, went straight over the top. Not anymore. I don't have to explain that. And we've got a lot of case histories now to talk about with the new entrants. And I've had 3 entrants just this week with some amazing people, which I'm looking forward to telling you about later on. They'll be looking at this in a completely different light now. And the good news is it's not putting anyone off. I think the quality of the entrant inquiries now is very strong. And I'm quite, 22 is going to be a lot of fun. One I didn't go on to, I've lost it in the mix here somewhere. Had 2 people asking about Gregor's boat and Tommy's boat. We've lost track of Tommy's boat, no idea where it is or if it's still floating. And Gregor's boat, we've kept the tracker going. There's no plans to salvage or do anything. They're drifting, they're up for grabs. If you want to go get it, it's all yours. Great Christmas present. Okay, so that's about it. And we'll shut this down. and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week. Jane's just come running in. Thanks for that. See you soon.